Hi everyone, this is Longvo. Today is September the 4th, 2012, and I'm analyzing one of my games in the Burlington Chess Club. I'm playing white, currently rated 1462, and my opponent, Mike Pajovic, rated 1691, playing black. So I start off with e4, and he goes c5 with the Sicilian, and I go knight to f3, and he goes d6, and I go d4. So c takes d, knight takes d4, knight to f6, and knight to c3. I'm not very familiar with my opening still. This is as far as I know about the Sicilian. And he plays a6. So yeah, I don't really know all the main lines, but my idea right now is to simply keep developing maybe the two bishops on e2, and then e3, and then put the queen on d2, and just to give my king options. And then so I go bishop to e2, and he goes g6. So bishop to e3, and he goes bishop to g7. So I'm thinking that he may want to castle kingside. So I go queen to d2. So now my king has the option to castle either side. And so now he pushes with b5. So maybe he's thinking I'm going to castle queenside. And so here what I'm noticing is if he continues to push, then my knight has to move, and then this e-pawn is undefended. So I go f3 to defend the pawn. And also if he was to push, my knight, and because my queen is out of the way, my knight would retreat here. And because now I've moved the f-pawn, the knight can relocate somewhere on the king side. So I was okay with that. So he goes bishop to b7. So he's fianchettoed both his bishops. The light squared bishop is going against a lot of pawns here. The dark squared bishop is probably a little bit more active at this point. And I thought to myself that his queen side is quite overextended here. So my idea was to just put more pressure on the king side with g4. So here I know I'm weakening this pawn here. This pawn becomes a backwards pawn, and but it has the bishop protecting it. I do see an outpost here eventually, but I'm sort of waiting for it to see if this pawn's gonna move, or if I'm gonna try to make it move by just exerting pressure. But what I'm thinking right now is to kick that knight away, and of course I didn't think he would go here if I was to kick it away, because then I would continue perhaps pushing here and then exchanging the light square bishop for that knight, just to destroy the king side. And he goes queen to c7, and so that move, yeah, so I didn't quite understand it fully, but of course he has the semi-open file, so maybe he's thinking of maybe even castling queenside and bringing the other rooks to use in this semi-open files, thinking that I might castle queenside. So I continue with my attack with g5, and he retreats knight to d7, just like I thought he would. So now this pawn is quite advanced, and my next idea is to perhaps exchange some pawns here to open up the king side, because at this point I'm telling him I'm not casting king side. So maybe that's why his queen is going queen side, expecting me to castle there. So I go h4, and now he pushes with e6. So now I've achieved that outpost. So perhaps I think going here would have been a better move. I'm not sure. Anyways, that's what he did. But he is blocking his dark squared bishop, and the light squared bishop is sort of blocked still. So I'm not sure if that's the best move because he just blocked off his dark squared bishop, and both his bishops are not very active. So I'm starting to gain a lot of space on the king side. So of course I have to retreat my knight to b3, and I'm okay with that because I was thinking of perhaps relocating the knight this way, and perhaps making a push, continuing my push on the king side. So after I retreat my knight, he develops his knight to c6, and so I take my outpost with knight to d5, attacking the queen, and he goes queen to d8. So if he had gone here, I think I would have tried to. So let's go back. So if he had gone to c8, there could be a fork here if that knight wasn't there. So then I would have perhaps found a way to somehow open up the f file here, and perhaps use my light squared bishop to exchange for the knight there, and then I could fork the queen and the rook. But he went to queen d8, and so I keep pushing with h5. So at this point there's no choice, right? Like there's nothing he can do there, and he decides to go knight to e7. So I think he's well, first of all, he's opening the diagonal for the bishop. He is attacking the knight. This knight is quite powerful, so I think his idea was to dislodge the knight, but of course the knight going here is also defending this pawn. So if I did exchange here, I don't know, obviously he's not going to take with this pawn because the rook would be hanging. Taking with this pawn, I think would be a good move. Yeah, of course he's you know, that way at least maybe he's connecting these two pawns, but maybe, I don't know, maybe he's thinking of taking with the knight, but then it leaves this knight in that strong outpost, and maybe he wants to keep more pawns close to the center. So here I'm thinking, so I like this knight. I don't feel like exchanging at this point, but I think I'm more aggressive here. I have the initiative, I have more space, and I should simply exchange, right? So if he takes with the knight, it's not a problem because he's obviously not going to take here. And then I would sort of destroy his king side, so this would permanently discastle his king. So I think that's what I should have done, but instead I decided to push for h6. I think this is a mistake, but my idea was to really inactivate this rook for a long time and the bishop. So now bishop has to retreat to f8. And now, so the knight here, I didn't feel like losing it. And also, I saw the king was totally trapped here, and I just felt that if somehow I checked him and then he would take back and I would take back, both these pawns are exerting a lot of pressure on the dark squares around the king. So I didn't think he would ever castle king side with a pawn so close. So if I can somehow get the other pawn here, I think that would have been good for me. So I go knight to f6 check, and knight takes f6, and g takes f6. So I think this is also a mistake, right? So now my whole attack is collapsing. This pawn, now I have to allocate this rook, and the bishop to defending this pawn. So that's number one. Number two is this one is totally isolated. There's no way for me to protect it. It will fall eventually. The only good thing is they are keeping this bishop and the rook trapped. So not really though, because if my rook and my bishop leaves, this bishop could be activated. So that was my thinking, right? So I'm putting pressure on that knight. So the knight retreats to c6. So now this pawn is hanging, and I go bishop to g5. So same thing. Now my pieces are stuck defending these two weak pawns. Well, I guess you could say they're undefended, but I wouldn't say that they're necessarily weak because they are deep in the 6th rank here, controlling a lot of the dark squares, inactivating this bishop. But still, I would have liked to keep it, you know, the king in the center, and have these pieces start to attack the king. So I wasn't too thrilled about this position, but I think I was still leading. And he goes queen to b6. So now the bishop here is no longer needs to defend this pawn. And I decide to castle queenside because I felt that his dark square bishop was no longer a threat. I wanted to double up on this pawn here and perhaps find a way to, because it's a backwards pawn, you know, perhaps find a way to attack it with maybe over here, and then just looking for a way to maybe get my bishop here, or use the knight to somehow maybe move the king here, and then the knight would somehow find the outpost here again. So that was my thinking. And now he goes rook to d8, so protecting the d pawn. So now he's not going to castle queenside, which is good. So at least I know that. And so now I decide to break the center because I felt that it would take a long time for him to develop the bishop, and then for him to castle would take a long time. So now's the time to strike, to just break the center, blow it open, start using my other pieces. I'm still keeping an eye on this pawn here, so the rook is kind of attached to defending that pawn, which I'm not too thrilled with. And e takes f, and bishop takes f4. So now the bishop is free to exert more pressure. And knight to e5. So that's a good outpost for his knight. And now he's threatening the e pawn. He's defending the d pawn. The knight has a good outpost. He can always create threats if that light squared bishop wasn't there. He can even have an outpost here eventually and force a trade. So I think as we trade, there's less pressure on him. So even now, I don't, like, suddenly the pressure's gone, and I'm like, where's my advantage, right? So I'm not too thrilled with the position at this point. I go bishop to e3, attacking the queen, with the idea of taking control of that diagonal. And because the rook is here, the queen can no longer go back and attack the pawn. And he retreats queen to c7. And so here I have the idea of perhaps getting the dark square bishop to fork the queen and the rook there, and or perhaps find a way to relocate the knight into the that wonderful outpost there. But of course I have to defend this pawn, so queen to d4, and bishop to c6. So His move here, at first I didn't understand it, but I guess he's relocating his bishop to a more central square closer to the king, and perhaps creating some threats on the king's side eventually. So I think that's so now I go bishop to d2 because the queen has freed up that space, and the idea is to skewer the queen and the rook. So he sees that and he goes rook to c8, and now that knight here is starting to bother me because I would have liked to play bishop to g4 here, making the light square bishop more active. So that's not going to happen, and I play bishop to b4 instead, going around the knight to exert pressure on that pawn again. So now I would be able to take it. And he retreats the bishop to d7 with the checkmate threat here. So I defend with rook to d2, and plus eventually I could use the other rook. I am careful here with this diagonal here that if the rook leaves, he could take with tempo, pinning that rook, so I would be in big trouble. So now I'm thinking perhaps I would want to move my king to b1, then relocate the knight somehow to find that outpost again. Of course he doesn't let me, so knight to c4, attacking the rook. And I felt at this point that I was starting to feel pressure, and I felt I had to exchange. So bishop takes c4, and instead of taking with the pawn, so he wants to make more exchanges to simplify the position, and the less pieces I have, the less I'll be able to attack his weaknesses. So at this point, there's the a6 pawn, the d6 pawn. These three are okay for now, and I have these three pawns are weak. So I don't want to exchange, and I felt that I could grab this pawn here with the bishop. So bishop takes d6, and I knew that if he was to take my queen, I would have to take back with the rook and not with the knight, because if I take with the knight, then the bishop hangs, and then that's not good. So queen takes d4, rook takes d4, bishop takes d6, rook takes d6. So even though there's a lot less pressure on him, I'm happy with my position because my rook is active, his rook is not, and I completely forgot that he was still able to castle. So I didn't even think of that. So now he goes bishop to e6, threatening the knight and doubling the pawn. So I wasn't threatened with that. I felt that I should start gobbling up some pawns, and because if he simply takes, I would just take back. Yeah, I have double pawns, but then this pawn's gonna fall so easily that I'm okay. So rook takes a6, and of course he doesn't take the knight. So he castles, and at that point I was surprised because I didn't even think of that possibility anymore. I thought his king side was destroyed, which is not even destroyed. So he's perfectly safe here, and the other rook is active. So I'm not too happy with the position, but I think I'm still leading with material here. So, and plus I have three connected pawns here versus one, and here is still okay. So these pawns are untouchable at this point. So I go knight to d4, forking the light square bishop and the pawn, and so he offers a trade with rook to a8, so I take, rook takes a8, rook takes a8, and knight takes e6, and f takes e6. So now we're entering the end game. So of course the a pawn is hanging, so king to b1, and so this move here prevents my pawn from protecting the other pawn. So he in a sense creates an isolated pawn here, well, two isolated pawns, and with e5, and I grab the d file with rook to d1, and he's making his king more active now. So he went king to f7. So at this point, I knew that there was no chance for me to defend these two pawns, and this was an opportunity for me to start getting my rook really active and to take some pawns. So rook to d7 check, king takes f6, rook takes h7, and I also knew this pawn was undefendable because the king would simply sneak behind, and I don't want to tie up that rook defending that pawn, right? So okay, so after I take, he goes king to g5, so I knew that pawn was going to fall. So I go rook to b7, attacking the b pawn, and he didn't choose to defend, so he went rook to h8. I think he should simply take with the king, but I guess he wanted to keep, well, if he took with the king, I would simply take and then threaten the other pawn, and there's no way for him to come back. So the king there is probably a stronger move, and the king can also attack this pawn, which will fall eventually. And rook takes b5, and king to f4, protecting the pawn and attacking mine. So now what's keeping me alive are these three pawns. This one's going to fall, this one's going to fall. He has two pass pawns as well, so it's getting stressful. So a4, so I chose the pawn furthest from the king to perhaps exert pressure and try to tie up that rook. Rook takes h6, so he's slowly equalizing. A5, g5, so rook to b6, so I'm grabbing the 6th rank, and then if he takes, I would simply take, and then with a temple further advancing my pawn. So of course he's not going to take. He goes rook to h1 check, king to a2, rook back to h8, and a6, king takes e4, b4. Well, the reason I went b4 is because I felt that this was the most advancement I could make at this point. If I push further, he would, well, he could just simply, yeah, he would probably have to block, right? And there would be no more progress. And plus, if the rook somehow leaves and he takes, it's going to be checked. So I didn't feel too comfortable with this pawn here, right? So being in that position, I'm not sure who would win. Perhaps if I, yeah, so if he did that, then the next step would be starting to push, and now it's getting really, really tight. So he could defend, and then this is getting really tight, right? So I don't know what could happen next. Right, so now I would probably have to move the king first, just to get out of that check, and I don't know if he takes the queen, takes. I'd still be okay. I think I'm still winning here. So That could have been a variation, but instead I go b4, g4, b5, g5, rook to g6. So now no more progress can be made here, and you see this square here that the pawn makes, the diagonal here. As long as my king is in that square, I'm able to catch up to that pawn. So if I can somehow take care of this pawn and use my pawns here to defend each other, then I'm in a good position. So now he goes king to d5, sort of giving up on that pawn and trying to defend the position. So I think his position is totally lost at this point. Rook takes g3, and king to c5, and rook to b3, and king to b6, and now I push the other pawn, c4, and now the rook is able to defend, and it's a matter of time before I create like a promotion. And rook to c8, putting pressure on that pawn. Rook to c3, defending the pawn and opening the b3 square for the king to be more active. e4, king to b3, king to c5, king to a4, king to d4, and king to b4. So now my king is active, defending the pawns, and the rook is free to go, and eventually I think there will be a sacrifice made, but I'm gonna try to wait until the end before sacrificing the rook, and in the meantime just exert a lot of pressure trying to push those pawns. e3, rook to c1, e2, and finally a7. So now it's getting really tight, and he goes e1 with a queen and a check. Rook takes e1, rook takes c4 check, king to a5, and rook to c2, with the idea that if I queen, he would simply deliver check and then take the queen. I'm still in a good position. Of course that didn't happen. I saw that. So he ran out of time at this point, so I won already, but it could have been something like king to b6, rook to a2, king to b7, king to c4, rook to b1, rook to a5, a8 queen, rook takes a8, king takes a8, and you know it could have gone something like this, and then it's just a matter of time before checkmate. Okay, so I hope everybody enjoyed this game, and I hope you guys learned something from that. Thanks.